Distance begins as something the body understands. A hand reaches across a table. A foot steps forward. A hallway is crossed without thought. Space, at this scale, is not a concept but a sensation measured in muscle tension, balance, effort, and time. You know how far something is because you have moved through similar distances before. Your brain does not calculate, it remembers. It compares the present moment to stored experience and produces an answer that feels immediate and correct. This is how distance becomes intuitive. A room feels small because you have stood in thousands like it. A street feels long because your legs remember the rhythm required to walk its length. Nothing about this process is abstract. It is grounded in lived motion. Distance is encoded as familiarity, not magnitude. Even when numbers appear, they remain secondary. A meter, a kilometer, a mile only matter because they correspond to sensations the body already knows. Without that correspondence, the numbers would be empty. This system evolved because it worked. For millions of years, survival depended on judging how far prey was, how close danger had moved, how much ground could be covered before exhaustion set in. The brain that emerged from this pressure is exquisitely tuned to scales where movement matters and consequences arrive quickly. It is a brain shaped by reach, not by infinity. At human scale, distance feels real because it is inseparable from action. You do not imagine distance, you feel it. And as long as the world stays within those boundaries, the mind remains confident, certain that it understands what space means. That confidence survives the first expansions. A city is larger than a body, but it is still navigable. Streets connect, landmarks orient, maps compress complexity into symbols the brain can learn. Even large journeys remain sequences of smaller ones, broken into steps that resemble familiar movement. 100 kilometers is not grasped all at once. It is reduced to hours driven, turns taken, fuel consumed. The brain copes by translating distance into process. It substitutes time for space, effort for length. This translation maintains the illusion of comprehension. Numbers grow, but meaning seems intact. 1,000 kilometers still feels imaginable because it can be expressed as a day of travel, a flight across a country, a memory of exhaustion followed by arrival. At no point does the brain confront raw magnitude. It never has to hold the entire distance in mind simultaneously. Instead, it stitches together fragments of experience and calls the result understanding. This strategy is so effective that its limits remain hidden. Even planetary distances initially appear manageable. Earth feels large but complete. You can see it on a globe, trace its surface with a finger. Imagine circumnavigation. The planet fits inside a room as an object. Space, at this stage, still behaves. It remains something that can be reduced, scaled, domesticated by representation. The mind does not yet realize that it is relying on substitutions rather than comprehension. It mistakes translation for understanding, unaware that the strategy will fail once experience runs out. Failure arrives quietly. It begins when distance can no longer be converted into movement or time that feels familiar. Beyond Earth, the moon seems close enough to picture. You have seen it rise. You know its face. The number that describes its distance feels large, but the object feels present. This presence is deceptive. It is memory filling in gaps. The moon appears reachable because it is visually intimate, not because its distance is understood. The same pattern repeats with the sun. It dominates the sky, anchors daily life, and yet the space separating it from Earth is so vast that no bodily analogy survives contact with the number. At this point, numbers stop shrinking into experience. They stand alone, unsupported. The brain responds by flattening them. Millions, billions, trillions begin to feel similar, differentiated only by labels rather than intuition. This is not a failure of intelligence. It is a boundary condition of cognition. The brain evolved to compare quantities within a narrow band where difference mattered. When magnitudes exceed that band, resolution collapses. Distances blur into abstraction. The mind acknowledges them without inhabiting them. It says the number aloud, nods, and moves on. Understanding becomes a ceremonial. This is where cosmic distance first breaks meaning. The universe expands, but the mental framework remains fixed, stretching until it tears. What replaces comprehension is familiarity with words, not with scale. The illusion persists because language continues to function even when intuition does not. At astronomical scales, distance stops behaving like distance. It no longer implies separation that could ever be crossed. Instead, it becomes a statement of irrelevance to action. Light years are not lengths in any human sense. They are declarations that movement is meaningless. The brain has no evolutionary reason to care about distances that cannot be traversed within a lifetime, a generation, or even a species. As a result, it treats them as symbolic rather than spatial. A light year becomes a badge of enormity, not a measure. 10 light years, 1,000, a million, collapse into the same emotional category. Unreachable. Once this threshold is crossed, scale loses texture. There is no felt difference between far and farther. The mind stops asking what the distance means and focuses instead on what the object is. Stars become points. Galaxies become names. Space becomes a backdrop rather than an expanse. This is not denial. It is cognitive economy. To function, the brain discards information it cannot use. Vast distance offers no actionable insight, so it is compressed into insignificance. Yet the numbers remain, demanding acknowledgement. They sit in textbooks and documentaries. Impressive, but inert. We learn them without internalizing them. We repeat them without imagining them. This is the precise moment where understanding fractures. Knowledge accumulates, but intuition withdraws. The universe grows larger, while the mind grows quieter. This quiet is often mistaken for acceptance. It feels calm to admit that space is big, that the universe is vast, but this calm is not comprehension. It is surrender. The brain recognizes that the problem exceeds its tools and chooses not to struggle. In doing so, it protects coherence at the cost of insight. Numbers that cannot be visualized are stored as facts, not experiences. They lose emotional weight. 1 billion kilometers does not feel heavier than 1 million because neither can be lifted by imagination. This flattening effect creates a false sense of mastery. Because the numbers no longer provoke confusion, it feels as though the confusion has been resolved. In reality, it has been bypassed. The mind has stopped trying to understand distance and settled for labeling it. This distinction matters. Labeling is reversible, understanding is not. When scale is only labeled, it can coexist with any narrative without resistance. The universe can be described as infinite, expanding, ancient, and the words will glide through the mind without friction. There is no internal alarm, no strain. True understanding would produce discomfort, disorientation, perhaps even fear. The absence of these reactions signals not enlightenment, but distance from meaning. The brain has adapted by numbing itself to scale. This numbness has consequences. When distance loses meaning, so does position. The idea of location becomes vague. Earth's place in the universe is spoken of with humility, but rarely felt. Being one planet among billions sounds profound. Yet it does not destabilize daily perception. The numbers are too large to intrude. The mind continues to operate as though its environment is central, bounded, and manageable. Cosmic distance becomes decorative, an intellectual backdrop that never interferes with lived reality. This compartmentalization allows modern humans to hold contradictory beliefs without tension. The universe can be unimaginably vast, and yet the horizon of concern remains local. The brain maintains its ancient scale while entertaining modern knowledge as abstraction. This split is rarely acknowledged. It is easier to celebrate how much we know than to confront how little of it we can actually grasp. Distance exposes this gap mercilessly. It reveals that observation does not equal understanding. Telescopes extend vision, but not intuition. Mathematics extends description, but not embodiment. The universe becomes visible while remaining mentally unreachable. We look outward and mistake clarity of image for clarity of comprehension. The distance between seeing and understanding grows as fast as the cosmos itself. There is a deeper implication hidden within this mismatch. If the brain cannot grasp distance beyond a certain scale, then its picture of the universe is necessarily incomplete in ways it cannot detect. Comprehension failure does not announce itself. It feels identical to comprehension success when both are mediated by symbols. The mind cannot tell when it has crossed from understanding into recitation. This creates a dangerous confidence. We assume that because we can describe cosmic distances accurately, we must therefore understand the universe they define. But description without intuition is fragile. It can be rearranged, contradicted, or replaced without resistance. The emotional neutrality that accompanies vast numbers makes them malleable. Infinity can be accepted or dismissed with equal ease. Expansion can be imagined without strain. The universe can be said to be billions of years old without altering the felt sense of time. Distance, stripped of experiential anchor, becomes a linguistic artifact. This raises an unsettling question. If distance is foundational to structure, and we cannot truly grasp it, what else about the universe are we mistaking for understanding simply because the symbols behave? The problem may not be ignorance, but overconfidence in abstraction. This overconfidence is reinforced by education. From an early age, numbers are presented as universal tools, capable of describing any scale. Children learn that larger numbers mean more, farther, longer. What is not taught is that meaning does not scale linearly with quantity. There is an implicit assumption that adding zeros preserves comprehension. In practice, Each additional order of magnitude erodes intuition. The educational system rewards correct repetition, not internalization. As a result, people graduate fluent in cosmic vocabulary but detached from cosmic reality. The gap widens silently. Distance becomes something that belongs to science, not to experience. It is outsourced to experts and instruments. The brain accepts this arrangement because it reduces cognitive load. Why struggle to imagine what cannot be lived? Yet this surrender comes at a cost. It removes the universe from the domain of understanding and places it into the domain of spectacle. Space becomes something to look at, not something to inhabit mentally. The sense of scale that once grounded survival is rendered obsolete, replaced by awe that never resolves into comprehension. The mind watches itself fail and calls the feeling wonder. Wonder, in this context, is a mask. It signals engagement while concealing limitation. To say that space is mind-breaking is to admit defeat while framing it as virtue. This reframing is comforting. It allows the brain to stop trying without acknowledging loss. Yet beneath the language of awe lies an unresolved tension. The universe we observe operates at scales that our cognition cannot natively support. This mismatch suggests that our understanding of reality is necessarily partial, filtered through tools never meant for such extremes. Distance is the first fracture line where this becomes visible. It is where intuition fails first and abstraction rushes in to fill the void. But abstraction cannot replace experience. It can only point toward it. When the pointing becomes permanent, understanding stalls. The mind builds a map it cannot enter. It knows where things are said to be, but not what that placement means. This raises a final, lingering uncertainty. If the brain cannot truly grasp the distances that define the universe, then every conclusion drawn from those distances rests on a foundation it cannot feel. And if that is true, then the universe we think we understand may be far stranger than the numbers suggest, waiting beyond a scale the mind has never learned to cross. Numbers begin as tools for survival. 1, 2, many. Enough to know whether food will last, whether allies outnumber threats, whether distance can be crossed before nightfall. Counting did not evolve to describe reality in its fullness. It evolved to make decisions under pressure. The earliest numerical systems were not abstractions, but judgments embedded in action. They answered questions like how much is enough and how far is too far. Precision beyond necessity carried no advantage. As long as the difference between few and many was clear, survival was possible. This is the foundation upon which all later mathematics rests. It is a foundation shaped by scarcity, immediacy, and consequence. When numbers stayed close to experience, they retained meaning. A herd larger than another mattered. A journey twice as long implied greater risk. Quantity was inseparable from outcome. The brain learned to associate number with feeling, effort, and expectation. Even today, small numbers carry weight because they still connect to this ancient circuitry. 3 feels different from 5. 10 feels larger than 7. These differences register automatically without calculation. They feel real because the mind can still simulate their implications. At this scale, numbers behave like reality. The breakdown begins when quantity outgrows consequence. As numbers increase beyond the range where difference changes outcome, the brain's evaluative system disengages. 100 and 1,000 no longer imply distinct actions. Both exceed immediate need. Both escape embodied comparison. The mind responds by compressing them. This compression is not a flaw, it is an efficiency. The brain is conserving resources by discarding distinctions that no longer matter for decision making. But once this compression begins, it accelerates. Millions, billions, trillions become indistinguishable not because they are equal, but because none of them connect to lived experience. The brain lacks reference points. It cannot simulate a million of anything in a way that affects behavior. As a result, it treats all large numbers as symbolic markers of very much. They enter the same mental category, stripped of scale. The difference between a million and a billion is linguistically clear, but emotionally inert. The mind acknowledges the hierarchy without inhabiting it. This is where numerical intuition collapses. Numbers stop functioning as measures and become labels. They signify magnitude without conveying it. This collapse is masked by fluency. We learn to speak comfortably about enormous quantities. We repeat them in news reports, scientific explanations, casual conversation. The ease of repetition creates an illusion of understanding. But repetition is not comprehension. Saying a number does not activate the neural systems that once made quantity meaningful. Those systems require consequence. Without it, numbers remain hollow. The brain processes them as facts, not as realities. This distinction is subtle but profound. Facts can be stored indefinitely without altering perception. Realities, by contrast, reshape expectation and behavior. Large numbers rarely do. They pass through consciousness without resistance. This is why astronomical figures can be learned and forgotten with equal ease. They do not integrate into the mental model of the world. They sit outside it, impressive but inert. The mind nods and moves on. Scientific units emerge as a response to this strain. When ordinary numbers fail, new scales are invented. Astronomical units, light years, parsecs appear to tame immensity by redefining it. But these units do not restore intuition. They formalize abstraction. A light year replaces an incomprehensible kilometer count with a concept even further removed from experience. Distance becomes time, but not a time anyone has lived. Light traveling for a year does not resemble any process the brain knows. It cannot be mapped onto effort or duration in a meaningful way. The unit is precise, but precision does not equal comprehension. In fact, precision often deepens alienation. The more exact the number, the clearer it becomes that intuition has no role to play. The brain retreats further, relying entirely on symbolic acceptance. These units are not bridges to understanding. They are signs that understanding has failed. They exist because the mind can no longer cope with raw scale. Language compounds the problem. Words like million and billion sound similar. Their phonetic weight is nearly identical. Nothing in their structure conveys the exponential gap between them. Language evolved for communication within human-scale environments. It excels at describing social relationships, immediate actions, visible objects. It was never designed to transmit orders of magnitude. As numbers grow, language flattens them. Adjectives like vast, immense, enormous pile atop one another without restoring distinction. They amplify emotion without specifying scale. The result is a vocabulary that gestures toward magnitude without delivering it. Mathematics attempts to compensate with notation, exponents, scientific form. But notation speaks to trained reasoning, not to intuition. It can prove relationships without making them felt. This creates a split between knowing and sensing. We know the universe is large, but we do not feel large distances as large. We know time scales are immense, but we do not experience deep time as duration. The brain remains anchored to its evolutionary window, translating everything outside it into symbols. This symbolic acceptance is often mistaken for understanding. Scientific literacy encourages confidence in numbers. If the measurement is accurate, the assumption follows that comprehension has been achieved. But accuracy does not guarantee integration. A number can be correct and still meaningless. Meaning requires context that connects to perception, memory, or action. Large numbers lack this context. They float free, detached from consequence. This detachment allows them to coexist with any narrative. The universe can be unimaginably old without affecting how time is felt. Distances can be astronomical without changing how space is navigated. The mind holds two models simultaneously, one symbolic and one experiential. The symbolic model contains the numbers. The experiential model governs behavior. The two rarely interact. This separation is stable because it reduces cognitive dissonance. If large-scale facts were fully integrated, they would destabilize everyday perception. The brain avoids this by isolating them. There is a psychological cost to this isolation. When numbers lose meaning, trust replaces intuition. We accept figures because authority assures us they are true, not because they resonate. This trust is necessary for collective knowledge, but it also introduces fragility. Understanding becomes dependent on external validation. Without intuition, errors cannot be felt, only detected through further abstraction. The individual mind becomes a passive recipient of scale, not an active participant. This passivity breeds a subtle frustration. We sense that something is missing. We hear about cosmic distances and feel impressed, yet empty. The numbers promise insight but deliver none. This gap generates unease. It suggests that the universe is being described in a language we can recite but not speak fluently. We are repeating phrases without grasping their implications. The frustration is not with science, but with ourselves. We suspect that comprehension should feel different than this. This suspicion deepens when confronted with extremes. Trillions of galaxies, billions of years, unimaginable distances. Each new figure adds weight without adding clarity. Instead of accumulating understanding, the mind accumulates fatigue. Abstraction overload sets in. The brain responds by disengaging emotionally. Awe replaces analysis. Wonder substitutes for comprehension. These responses are not failures, they are coping mechanisms. They allow engagement without integration, but they also signal a boundary. Beyond a certain point, numbers stop informing and start overwhelming. The mind protects itself by turning scale into spectacle. This transformation is comforting, but it conceals a loss. The universe becomes something observed rather than understood. We watch numbers pass like scenery, never stepping into the landscape they describe. This raises a troubling question. If numbers cannot transmit scale emotionally, what does scientific understanding mean? Is it enough to know relationships without feeling their magnitude? Science progresses through abstraction, but humans live through intuition. The two are misaligned. Measurements can be flawless, while comprehension remains absent. This does not invalidate science, but it challenges the assumption that knowledge automatically becomes understanding. Perhaps understanding, as experienced by the human brain, has limits that no increase in precision can overcome. Perhaps some aspects of reality can only be accepted symbolically, never felt. If so, then much of what we claim to understand about the universe exists only as agreement, not as insight. We agree on the numbers, the units, the models, but our minds remain outside the reality they describe. This possibility unsettles because it reframes ignorance. The problem may not be that we lack information, but that our cognitive architecture cannot absorb it in meaningful form. Numbers exceed not just imagination, but integration. They remain external, like a map of a place no one can visit. We trust the map, use it, build upon it, yet never develop a sense of terrain. The frustration this produces is subtle but persistent. It manifests as a desire for visualization, for analogy, for anything that might translate abstraction back into experience. This desire drives the next attempt. If numbers fail, perhaps images, comparisons, or scaled models can succeed. Perhaps meaning can be recovered through representation rather than calculation. But even this hope carries uncertainty. It remains unclear whether scale can ever be made felt, or whether the universe will always outrun the mind's ability to inhabit it, leaving us searching for ways to see what numbers alone cannot show. Distance changes character when measured in light. What once felt like separation in space becomes separation in time. A light year does not describe how far something is in any embodied sense. It describes how long information takes to arrive. The shift is subtle but destabilizing. Space stops being a container and becomes a delay. To look outward is no longer to observe what exists elsewhere, but to receive messages sent long ago. The universe reveals itself not as a shared environment, but as a layered archive. Every distant object is encountered at a different moment in its own past. This reframing undermines the most basic assumption carried by perception, that seeing implies simultaneity. In everyday life, sight confirms presence. What you see exists now, in the same moment you do. Light years quietly dismantle this rule. They introduce a lag so vast that the concept of now begins to fracture. The brain, accustomed to negligible delays, struggles to adapt. It was built to assume immediacy, to treat perception as a window into the present. Light years replace that window with a time machine the mind never learned to operate. At human scales, the delay of light is invisible. It takes light a fraction of a second to cross a room, milliseconds to travel across a city. These delays are too small to register. The brain evolved in a world where light speed effectively erased temporal separation. As a result, perception and reality merged seamlessly. What was seen was assumed to be current. This assumption became foundational. It shaped how cause and effect were understood, how presence was defined, how certainty was established. When light becomes the measuring stick of distance, that foundation erodes. A star 1 light-year away is seen as it was 1 year ago. At 10 light-years, a decade intervenes. At thousands, history stretches back beyond individual lives. The mind hears these facts, but it cannot inhabit them. Time, like distance before it, loses texture. Past and present blur, distinguished only by labels. The brain registers the delay intellectually, but perception remains anchored to immediacy. The star still feels present. The contradiction is tolerated because resolving it would require re-engineering intuition itself. This tolerance masks a deeper disruption. If light defines what can be known, then reality becomes stratified by accessibility. There is no universal present moment that can be observed across the cosmos. Each location occupies its own temporal slice relative to every other. The universe does not unfold in a single, synchronized now. Instead, it consists of countless overlapping pasts arriving at different times. This idea resists internalization. The brain prefers a unified timeline, a shared present that anchors meaning. Without it, orientation falters. Events lose a common frame of reference. The concept of now becomes local, fragile, conditional. On cosmic scales, simultaneity dissolves. Two distant events cannot be said to coexist in any meaningful sense. They belong to different temporal layers, separated by the finite speed of light. This is not philosophical speculation. It is a structural feature of reality. Yet it remains emotionally inaccessible. The mind continues to imagine the universe as though it shares a present, because abandoning that assumption threatens coherence. The problem intensifies as distance increases. Nearby stars are seen years or decades in the past, but galaxies are seen as they were millions or billions of years ago. The light arriving now left when Earth itself was young or not yet formed. To look deep into space is to look into eras that no longer exist. The objects observed may have changed beyond recognition or vanished entirely. Some may be gone, their light still traveling. This creates a peculiar tension between existence and perception. What is seen may not be there. What is there may not yet be seen. The brain has no intuitive framework for this asymmetry. In lived experience, presence and perception coincide closely enough to be treated as identical. Light years sever that link. They introduce a universe where knowledge is always delayed, where certainty is provisional, where the present is never fully accessible. The mind accepts this in theory, but it does not feel it. The stars still appear steady, fixed, timeless. The delay is too abstract to disturb the image. This abstraction hides the psychological cost. When time and distance merge, both lose clarity. A light year is neither a duration nor a length the brain can simulate. It occupies a conceptual no man's land. Distance measured as time requires imagining motion without movement, duration without experience. Light does not tire, does not age, does not change. Its journey cannot be mapped onto human effort or memory. As a result, the unit remains hollow. It conveys magnitude without sensation. The brain responds by reverting to symbolism. A light year becomes shorthand for very far. its temporal implication quietly ignored. Yet that implication is precisely what destabilizes intuition. If every observation is a glimpse into the past, then the universe cannot be apprehended as a single, coherent moment. It becomes a collage of times stitched together by perception. The mind was not built to assemble such a collage. It prefers continuity. It prefers a present that stretches uniformly in all directions. Light years deny this preference. The denial produces unease when examined closely. If the universe has no shared present, then the idea of cosmic simultaneity collapses. Events that appear adjacent in space may be separated by immense spans of time. The notion of what is happening now loses meaning beyond local scales. This challenges deep-seated intuitions about reality. It suggests that the present is not a universal stage on which everything exists together, but a narrow slice each observer occupies alone. The brain resists this conclusion because it isolates consciousness. It implies that each vantage point is temporally solitary, surrounded by pasts rather than coexisting presents. The stars become ghosts of their former states. The sky transforms into a record rather than a panorama. This reframing is unsettling because it strips the universe of immediacy. It replaces shared existence with deferred information. The mind senses the implication but struggles to integrate it emotionally. This struggle reveals another limitation. Human experience treats time as something that flows uniformly. Past recedes, present arrives, future approaches. Light years fracture this flow. They show that time does not advance everywhere at once in any observable way. Instead, it is revealed unevenly, filtered by distance. The universe does not present itself as a synchronized whole, but as a staggered sequence of revelations. This does not align with how consciousness operates. Awareness depends on continuity. It assumes that the world it perceives is cotemporal with itself. Light years undermine that assumption without offering an alternative intuition. The result is vertigo. The mind floats between knowing and feeling, aware that its model of time is incomplete but unable to replace it. Temporal unease replaces spatial confusion. Distance no longer just separates objects, it separates moments. The universe stretches not only across space, but across incompatible nows. This incompatibility grows more disturbing at larger scales. When observing the most distant regions, the delay approaches the age of the universe itself. The light arriving now carries information from epochs when the laws of reality may have behaved differently. Space becomes inseparable from history. The farther one looks, the less the concept of current state applies. The universe reveals its childhood, adolescence, and formative chaos, all layered within a single view. This layering defies intuition. The brain expects history to be behind, not surrounding. Yet in cosmic observation, the past envelops the observer. Every direction contains a different era. There is no edge where the present resumes. This inversion destabilizes orientation. The mind cannot place itself within such a structure. It lacks a center of temporal gravity. The present becomes an island surrounded by seas of past light. This realization carries existential weight. If observation always lags behind reality, then knowledge is perpetually outdated. The universe cannot be known as it is, only as it was. This does not diminish the value of observation, but it complicates its meaning. Certainty becomes asymptotic, approached but never reached. The brain, accustomed to closing gaps between perception and action, finds no closure here. There is no corrective movement, no way to catch up. Light enforces a permanent delay. This delay transforms the cosmos into something fundamentally inaccessible. It can be studied, modeled, inferred, but never encountered in real time. The present moment of the universe is forever hidden, receding faster than information can arrive. The mind senses the loss without fully articulating it. It feels like absence, like something perpetually missed. This absence reframes understanding itself. To know the universe is not to grasp a current state, but to reconstruct histories from signals. The present becomes an inference, not an observation. This demands a level of abstraction that intuition cannot support. The brain compensates by collapsing time distinctions, treating distant objects as if they coexist. It imagines galaxies as neighbors rather than ancestors. This fiction preserves coherence at the cost of accuracy. It allows the universe to feel like a place rather than a timeline. But the fiction is fragile. When examined, it dissolves, revealing a cosmos without a shared now. The unsettling implication lingers. If simultaneity does not exist at cosmic scales, then the universe is not a single moment extended outward, but a mosaic of moments never aligned. This mosaic challenges not only perception, but the very idea of presence. And as distance increases further, the fracture deepens, hinting that time itself may behave in ways the mind is wholly unprepared to confront. Distance reaches a breaking point when space itself refuses to remain still. Up to this moment, separation could be imagined as something fixed, a gap that simply existed and could, at least in principle, be crossed given enough time or effort. Expansion changes that assumption entirely. The universe is not merely large, it is growing larger in every direction at once. This growth does not add new space at the edges. It stretches the space that already exists, pulling everything apart from everything else. Distance is no longer a static property. It is a process, and the brain, already strained by vastness and delay, now faces a new failure: separation that increases faster than understanding can follow. At the scale of stars, expansion is invisible. Gravity dominates locally, binding systems together. Planets orbit stars. Stars orbit galactic centers. Familiar structures hold. The stability reinforces the intuition that space is a container, something that objects move through rather than something that moves itself. But beyond individual galaxies, that intuition collapses. Galaxies are not scattered through a fixed void. They are carried apart by the stretching of space between them. The farther apart they are, the faster that separation grows. This relationship is counterintuitive. Distance becomes self-amplifying. Separation feeds on itself. The mind searches for analogy and finds none that hold. Expansion does not behave like motion through space. Nothing is traveling outward from a center. There is no direction of escape. Every point is receding from every other point simultaneously. This is not something the brain can simulate. It lacks the conceptual machinery to imagine everywhere moving away from everywhere else at once. As scale increases, the consequences sharpen. Individual galaxies gather into clusters, bound by gravity, orbiting common centers of mass. These clusters, in turn, form superclusters, linked along vast filaments of matter that trace the universe's large-scale structure. Between these filaments lie enormous voids, regions where matter is scarce and separation dominates. Even these structures are temporary. Expansion continues to stretch the distances between clusters, thinning connections, weakening gravitational influence. The universe's architecture is not stable. It is dissolving. What appears as a cosmic web today is slowly unraveling, its threads lengthening beyond the reach of mutual influence. The brain registers the description, but cannot internalize its implications. Structure dissolving over billions of years feels abstract, distant, unreal. Yet this process determines what can ever be known or contacted. It defines the limits of interaction long before those limits are felt. This is where distance diverges from separability. Two objects can be far apart and still, in principle, reachable. Distance alone does not forbid connection. Separation in the expanding universe does. There exists a boundary beyond which no signal, no matter how fast or persistent, can ever arrive. This boundary is not an edge in space, but a horizon in time. It marks regions receding so quickly that light emitted now will never overcome the expansion between sender and receiver. These regions are not merely distant, they are causally disconnected. They exist beyond the possibility of relationship. The brain struggles here because separation without contact feels indistinguishable from absence. Something that can never influence us might as well not exist from an experiential standpoint. Yet it does exist in a technical sense, occupying space, evolving independently, forever unknown. This horizon is not static. As the universe expands, it moves inward relative to what can be observed. Regions once visible drift beyond reach. Light already on its way may still arrive, but nothing new can follow. The observable universe shrinks in terms of future interaction, even as it appears vast in the present. This inversion is deeply unsettling. Intuition expects horizons to recede as time passes, revealing more. Here, the opposite occurs. Time closes doors. The longer the universe evolves, the more isolated each region becomes. The future is not one of increasing connection, but of progressive separation. This runs counter to human narratives of exploration and reach. It suggests that the universe is not opening itself to understanding, but sealing itself off. The psychological impact of this realization is subtle but profound. It reframes ignorance as permanent. There are parts of the universe that will never be known, not because of technological limitation, but because of cosmic structure. No advancement can bridge the gap. The laws of reality forbid it. This is not a challenge to be overcome. It is a boundary condition. The brain, conditioned to treat distance as a problem, solvable by speed or endurance, resists this conclusion. It searches for loopholes, hypothetical shortcuts, future breakthroughs. Yet the separation enforced by expansion is absolute. It transforms a distance into destiny. Some regions are not merely far away. They are fundamentally other, evolving in isolation, unreachable even in principle. This realization introduces a new kind of loss. It is not the loss of proximity, but the loss of possibility. Entire galaxies, perhaps entire civilizations, if they exist, are slipping beyond the reach of influence, observation, and shared history. They are not dying. They are departing. The universe is actively removing parts of itself from relationship. This process is slow on human timescales, but relentless. Nothing reverses it. Gravity can bind locally, but it cannot halt global expansion. Over deep time, clusters themselves will drift apart, leaving isolated island universes surrounded by darkness. The night sky will empty. The memory of structure will fade. Distance will no longer be something that separates known things. It will define what is unknowable. At this stage, distance begins to resemble non-existence from a human perspective. If something cannot be observed, influenced, or reached, what meaning does its existence carry? The brain equates reality with interaction. What cannot interact might as well not be there. This equivalence is practical, not philosophical. It reflects how cognition prioritizes relevance. The expanding universe forces a confrontation with this bias. It reveals that existence does not depend on accessibility. Vast regions of reality persist without ever intersecting our causal sphere. They are real without being relevant. This distinction destabilizes the intuitive link between being and knowing. It suggests that reality is far larger than any possible account of it, not just in scale, but in structure. Distance does not merely hide things, it permanently excludes them. The voids between filaments exemplify this exclusion. They are not empty in an absolute sense, but they are defined by absence of interaction. Matter, there is sparse, influence weak, connection minimal. These voids expand faster than denser regions, accelerating separation. They dominate the universe by volume, even if not by mass. Most of space is not filled with stars or galaxies, but with expanding nothingness. The brain struggles to assign meaning to this. Nothingness feels passive, inert. Expansion reveals it as active, generative of separation. The void grows, not by adding content, but by increasing distance. It creates isolation without destruction. This is a form of change that leaves objects intact while erasing relationships. The mind, oriented toward events and transformations, finds this difficult to register. Nothing dramatic happens. Things simply drift apart until connection ceases. This drifting challenges the idea of a shared cosmos. If regions of space are causally isolated, then the universe is not a single, unified system in any practical sense. It is a patchwork of domains, each evolving independently, unaware of the others. The notion of the universe as a coherent whole becomes an abstraction, a bookkeeping category rather than an experienced reality. For any observer, the universe is limited to what can be seen and influenced. Everything beyond is theoretical. Expansion ensures that this limitation tightens over time. The observable universe becomes not just a snapshot of the past, but a shrinking window into a larger reality that recedes faster than knowledge can chase it. This has implications for meaning itself. Human narratives rely on continuity and connection. They assume that what exists now can, at least in principle, be related to what exists elsewhere or elsewhen. Expansion breaks this assumption. It introduces permanent disconnection as a fundamental feature of reality. The universe is not only vast, it is actively fragmenting into regions that will never share information. This fragmentation is quiet, invisible, and unstoppable. It does not announce itself with catastrophe. It simply unfolds. The brain resists engaging with this idea because it offers no resolution, no action, no adaptation. It demands acceptance of isolation on a cosmic scale. This acceptance is difficult because it mirrors existential fears at a grander level. Just as individuals fear isolation and irrelevance, the universe itself appears to be structured toward disconnection. The same logic that makes some places unreachable makes some knowledge impossible. Distance ceases to be a challenge and becomes a verdict. The farther out one looks, the more the universe reveals its indifference to comprehension. It is not arranged for discovery. It does not preserve accessibility. It expands without regard for observers, indifferent to what can or cannot be known. The mind senses this indifference and recoils. It prefers to imagine a cosmos waiting to be explored, not one actively withdrawing. As expansion continues, even the concept of distance loses clarity. When separation increases faster than light can travel, distance stops functioning as a measure of potential interaction. It becomes a marker of exclusion. 2 points can be closer in space, yet forever separated in time. The brain cannot reconcile this with its inherited models. It continues to treat distance as length, ignoring its new role as barrier. This misalignment persists because correcting it would require abandoning the idea that the universe is navigable. Instead, the mind clings to familiar metaphors, even as reality undermines them. Eventually, the question arises whether distance, taken to its extreme, becomes indistinguishable from non-existence. If something can never be observed, never influence anything within our horizon, never enter any chain of cause and effect we can access, then its existence is purely theoretical. It exists in equations and models, not in experience. The universe may be filled with such regions, vast beyond comprehension, yet functionally absent from any lived or observed reality. This does not mean they are unreal. It means that reality itself exceeds the bounds of interaction. The expanding void enforces this excess relentlessly. This realization does not arrive with clarity or closure. It lingers as unease. The universe grows larger, not just in size, but in irrelevance to human comprehension. Distance no longer promises discovery. It guarantees exclusion. Expansion ensures that isolation increases, horizons contract, and possibilities diminish. What remains accessible becomes precious, finite, bounded. Beyond that boundary lies not mystery waiting to be solved, but reality permanently out of reach. And as expansion continues unchecked, it suggests that there may be an ultimate limit, not just to travel or observation, but to understanding itself. A boundary where distance ceases to be a measure and becomes a final separation the mind can sense but never cross. There comes a point where distance stops inviting movement and starts enforcing limits. Earlier, separations tempted imagination with the possibility of crossing, however remote. Even when unreachable in practice, they still felt open in principle. Cosmic horizons change that feeling completely. They are not problems awaiting better tools. They are boundaries written into the structure of reality itself. Beyond them, distance does not increase gradually or negotiably. It becomes absolute. The universe presents a line that cannot be stepped over, not because of weakness or ignorance, but because of how space, time and causality are arranged. This is where curiosity collides with finality, and the mind encounters something it was never designed to accept, a wall that cannot be breached, even in theory. The idea of a permanent boundary is psychologically alien. Human progress has been shaped by the repeated breaking of limits. Mountains were crossed, oceans were sailed, the sky was entered. Each barrier that once appeared absolute eventually yielded to ingenuity. This history conditions expectation. When confronted with vast distances, the instinct is to assume that enough time, energy, or intelligence will find a way through. Cosmic horizons refuse this narrative. They are not obstacles within space, but features of space itself. No amount of propulsion shortens them. No future technology dissolves them. They exist because information cannot travel faster than light, and because space is expanding in such a way that some regions recede forever. This is not a temporary condition. It is not a phase. It is a permanent geometry. The mind resists this because it undermines the deepest assumption of progress, that limits are provisional. Understanding this requires abandoning the idea that the universe is fully available to inquiry. There are regions from which light will never reach us, no matter how long we wait. There are events that will never be observed, processes that will never be inferred, histories that will never intersect with ours. This is not a failure of observation. It is an outcome of cosmic structure. The horizon defines the maximum extent of causal connection. Beyond it, reality continues without reference to us. The brain struggles here because it equates reality with potential experience. If something cannot ever be experienced, its existence feels abstract, almost fictional. Yet these regions are as real as anything that can be seen. Their inaccessibility does not diminish their reality. It merely excludes them from relationship. This exclusion introduces a new form of ignorance. It is not ignorance that can be reduced, only acknowledged. The boundary does not move outward with time. It moves inward. As the universe expands, more regions slip beyond reach. Knowledge does not accumulate toward completeness. Instead, it approaches a ceiling defined by horizon limits. This ceiling is not a gap in data, but structural maximum. No experiment can exceed it. No observation can bypass it. The universe enforces a finite informational domain for any observer. This idea is deeply unsettling because it reframes knowledge as something bounded not by effort, but by law. The mind, trained to treat understanding as expandable, recoils from the suggestion that there is a final perimeter beyond which questions cannot even be asked meaningfully. The psychological effect of this realization is claustrophobic. The universe is vast, yet what can be known is confined. The observable region becomes a bubble surrounded by unreachable reality. Inside the bubble, patterns can be studied, histories reconstructed, models refined. Outside it, existence continues in silence. The mind senses the disproportion. It knows that what lies beyond may dwarf what is accessible. Entire structures, processes, perhaps even entire epochs of cosmic evolution unfold without ever leaving a trace within the observable domain. This creates a tension between scale and significance. The universe is mostly beyond reach, yet human understanding must operate as though the reachable portion is all that matters. This tension cannot be resolved. It can only be tolerated. Tolerance, however, is not the same as comfort. The presence of an unbreachable edge undermines the sense of openness that fuels curiosity. Exploration thrives on the assumption that unknown territory can eventually become known. Horizons deny this promise. They suggest that some unknowns are permanent. This permanence shifts the emotional tone of inquiry. Curiosity becomes shadowed by resignation. There is knowledge that will never arrive, answers that will never be available. The brain does not like unanswered questions, especially when they are framed as unanswerable. It seeks closure, resolution, completion. Cosmic limits deny all three. They introduce finality without fulfillment. This finality also alters the meaning of distance itself. Distance is no longer a measure of how far something is, but of whether it can ever matter. A region beyond the horizon is not just far away. It is causally irrelevant. No signal from there can influence anything here. In practical terms, its existence is disconnected from all possible experience. This creates a paradox. The universe is defined by regions that, while real, are forever excluded from any account of reality available to observers. Knowledge becomes local. Reality becomes larger than any description. The mind senses the asymmetry but lacks a framework to accommodate it. It was shaped in environments where relevance tracked proximity. What was far away was less important because it was harder to reach, not because it was forbidden. Horizons replace difficulty with impossibility. Impossibility has a different psychological weight. Difficulty invites effort. Impossibility demands acceptance. Acceptance, in this context, feels like surrender. It conflicts with the identity of a species that defines itself by overcoming constraints. The universe's refusal to yield beyond certain distances feels personal, even though it is not. It triggers a quiet existential response. If reality contains parts that are forever inaccessible, then understanding is inherently incomplete. Not temporarily incomplete, but structurally incomplete. The mind is forced to confront the idea that its best theories, its most refined models, will always describe only a subset of what exists. There is no path to total knowledge. The horizon ensures this. This realization reframes ignorance from a problem to be solved into a condition to be lived with. It suggests that knowledge has a maximum range, just as vision does. Beyond that range, speculation replaces evidence, and speculation itself is constrained by lack of contact. The universe does not simply withhold answers. It withholds the possibility of asking certain questions meaningfully. Questions about what lies beyond the horizon cannot be answered even in principle. There is no experiment that can probe there, no signal that can be received. Such questions become metaphysical rather than scientific, not because they are abstract, but because they are disconnected from any possible observation. The brain struggles to categorize this. It prefers clear boundaries between what is unknown and what is unknowable. Horizons blur that line. They force acknowledgement of unknowability as a permanent feature of reality. This permanence affects how meaning is constructed. Human meaning often arises from the belief that the world is intelligible, that patterns can be uncovered, that mystery is temporary. When faced with absolute limits, this belief wavers. The universe appears less like a puzzle waiting to be solved and more like a landscape with inaccessible regions. One can map the edges, but not enter. This shifts the role of understanding. Instead of expanding endlessly, it becomes an exercise in depth within boundaries. The mind must adjust to the idea that completeness is not an option. This adjustment is uncomfortable. It requires relinquishing a sense of destiny tied to total comprehension. The discomfort deepens when considering that these limits are not just spatial, but temporal. There are events whose light will never reach us, not because of distance alone, but because expansion accelerates separation faster than information can travel. These events might be happening right now, in their own local present, yet they are permanently absent from ours. The concept of now fractures further. Not only is there no shared present across space, there are presents that will never intersect with ours at all. The universe becomes a collection of isolated temporal islands, each bounded by horizons. The mind, already strained by the loss of simultaneity, now confronts the loss of potential connection entirely. This loss has an existential dimension. If reality is larger than what can ever be known, then knowledge ceases to be a path toward completeness. It becomes a local practice, bounded and provisional. This does not diminish its value, but it changes its character. Understanding becomes an activity rather than a destination. The brain must learn to operate without the expectation of final answers. This is difficult because expectation of closure is deeply ingrained. Narratives end, questions resolve, problems are solved. Cosmic horizons deny narrative satisfaction. They introduce an open-endedness that cannot be closed, not because the story is unfinished, but because it extends beyond any possible telling. This open-endedness produces intellectual claustrophobia. The universe is immense, yet the knowable portion is finite. The mind oscillates between awe at the vastness and unease at the confinement. Both reactions coexist uneasily. Awe suggests openness. Confinement suggests restriction. The horizon embodies both. It reveals how much exists while enforcing how little can be accessed. This duality is psychologically taxing. It destabilizes the simple emotional responses that usually accompanies discovery. Instead of excitement or fear alone, there is a muted, persistent tension. The universe is not hostile, but it is indifferent to our need for comprehension. Indifference is perhaps the most difficult aspect to accept. The horizon is not placed there to challenge or test. It is a consequence of how reality unfolds. There is no intention behind it. This lack of intention deprives the mind of narrative framing. There is no antagonist, no obstacle to overcome, no reward for persistence. There is only structure. Accepting structure without purpose requires a kind of intellectual humility that runs counter to human self-conception. It suggests that some questions exist without answers, and that this is not a temporary state. The mind resists this because it threatens the idea that understanding is the highest form of engagement with reality. As this resistance fades, a more unsettling thought emerges. If there are absolute limits to observation, then there may also be limits to explanation. Models rely on data. Data rely on observation. Beyond the horizon, both fail. Theories about the unobservable must remain untested, forever speculative. This introduces a boundary not just to knowledge, but to certainty. Even within the observable universe, explanations may depend on conditions beyond what can be verified. The horizon casts a shadow backward, complicating interpretation of what can be seen. It suggests that some aspects of reality may never be fully grounded in evidence. This does not invalidate science, but it constrains its scope. The mind must adjust to a world where explanation has an edge. Edges, by their nature, provoke anxiety. They imply endings. The horizon is an ending without destruction. Nothing stops existing beyond it. It simply stops being accessible. This is harder to process than loss through disappearance. There is no event to mark the transition. No catastrophe announces the boundary. It is always there, quietly enforcing separation. The mind cannot dramatize it. It must sit with it. This sitting produces a low-level unease that permeates contemplation of the cosmos. The universe feels less like an open field and more like a chamber with unseen walls. This chamber is not small. It contains billions of galaxies, vast structures, deep histories. Yet knowing that it is bounded changes how it is perceived. Infinity retreats, finitude advances. The mind recalibrates its sense of scale, not downward, but inward. What matters is not how much exists, but how much can ever be known. This shift is subtle but transformative. It reframes curiosity from expansion to refinement. It forces a confrontation with limits that cannot be negotiated. The universe does not promise total understanding. It offers only what lies within the horizon. As this realization settles, the most unsettling question arises. If knowledge has a maximum range, what does that mean for meaning itself? Meaning is often tied to understanding, to the belief that the world can be comprehended in principle. If comprehension is bounded, then meaning must be constructed within those bounds. This does not render meaning impossible, but it makes it contingent. It must operate without the guarantee of completeness. The horizon ensures that some truths will remain forever beyond reach. The mind stands at this edge, aware of what cannot be crossed, sensing that beyond it lies not just distance, but the end of inquiry as it has always been imagined. And with that awareness comes the final unease. The recognition that understanding itself may be finite, enclosed by walls that no amount of thought can pass, leaving the ultimate shape of reality forever just out of reach. To arrive at the end of scale is not to arrive at an answer, but at a condition. After distance has stretched intuition beyond usefulness, after numbers have flattened into noise, after time has fractured into layers, and horizons have enforced permanent separation, what remains is not clarity, but awareness of limitation. The universe does not yield itself to thought. It exceeds it. This excess is not accidental. It is structural. Consciousness did not arise to model infinity or inhabit cosmic totality. It arose to navigate immediacy, to survive within narrow margins of space and time. And yet, here it is, aware of a universe that dwarfs every framework it can construct. This awareness is the final tension, the quiet one that follows escalation. The universe is not merely larger than the body, it is larger than thought itself. This realization invites a question that cannot be answered cleanly. If understanding fails, does significance fail with it? Much of human meaning is built on comprehension. To understand something is to feel oriented within it, to locate oneself relative to causes and effects. When comprehension falters, orientation weakens. The universe begins to feel indifferent, not hostile, but unconcerned with whether it can be known. This indifference is difficult to accept because it undermines the assumption that meaning arises from mastery. If the universe cannot be mastered intellectually, then meaning must come from another source. The mind resists this shift. It has been trained to equate knowing with control, explanation with value. A universe too large for thought challenges that equation at its root. Yet the failure of comprehension does not erase experience. Consciousness persists inside a reality it cannot fully map. This persistence is not a flaw. It is the defining feature of awareness. To be conscious is not to contain the world, but to be exposed to it. The mind does not need to understand the totality of reality to be affected by it. It needs only to encounter fragments, impressions, moments. The night sky does not become less moving because its distances cannot be grasped. If anything, the inability to grasp them intensifies the response. Awe does not arise from understanding, but from confrontation with limits. The vastness that resists thought does not nullify significance. It reframes it. Reframing requires letting go of the expectation that knowledge culminates in closure. The desire for final answers is deeply human. It reflects a preference for bounded narratives, for problems that resolve. The universe does not offer this structure. It offers continuation without conclusion. Distance stretches outward without promise of completion. Horizons enforce endings without explanation. Time unfolds without synchrony. These features are not obstacles to meaning. They are the context within which meaning must operate. Consciousness exists not at the center of understanding, but at its edge. That edge is not a failure point. It is the only place awareness has ever lived. From this perspective, limitation becomes informative rather than discouraging. The boundaries of comprehension outline the shape of the mind itself. By encountering what cannot be thought, consciousness learns what it is. It discovers its own scale by pressing against what exceeds it. Distance, in this sense, becomes a mirror. The farther outward attention extends, the more clearly cognitive finitude is revealed. This revelation does not diminish experience. It grounds it. It reminds awareness that it is situated, contingent, local. The universe is not obligated to be intelligible to the creatures within it. Meaning does not depend on total access. It emerges from relation, not possession. Relation persists, even when comprehension fails. The universe may be too large for thought, but thought is still inside it. Consciousness participates in reality simply by existing, by observing, by responding. This participation does not require global understanding. It requires only presence. The inability to grasp a cosmic totality does not invalidate local significance. A moment of reflection remains meaningful even if the universe contains regions forever inaccessible. A thought retains value even if it cannot encompass all that exists. Meaning is not proportional to scale. It is proportional to engagement. This challenges a common assumption that human smallness implies insignificance. Smallness in scale does not equate to triviality in experience. Consciousness does not compete with the universe for size. It occupies a different dimension entirely. It is not a quantity, but a condition. The fact that the universe exceeds thought does not render thought meaningless. It situates it. Awareness becomes something that happens within immensity, not something that explains immensity. This shift removes the burden of total comprehension. It allows significance to arise without the pressure of mastery. Acceptance of this condition is not resignation. It is adjustment. The mind recalibrates its expectations. Instead of striving to collapse the universe into understanding, it learns to coexist with uncertainty. This coexistence is quieter than resolution, but more stable. It does not depend on answers arriving. It tolerates unanswered questions without framing them as failures. The discomfort remains, but it becomes familiar. The universe stays vast, distance stays incomprehensible, and consciousness continues, aware of both facts simultaneously. This simultaneity is subtle. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself as insight. It feels like stillness after strain. The escalation of scale has exhausted the instinct to conquer. What remains is a reflective pause. In this pause, the universe is no longer a problem to be solved, but a condition to be inhabited. Distance is no longer something to overcome, but something that defines context. The mind does not expand to match the universe. It settles into its own limits. Settling does not end curiosity. It changes its tone. Questions persist, but without the demand for finality. Inquiry becomes exploration within boundaries rather than a quest for totality. The universe remains strange, but not antagonistic. Its refusal to be fully known is not an insult. It is a fact. Consciousness adapts by finding meaning not in answers, but in the act of questioning itself. The question becomes a form of engagement rather than a step toward closure. This engagement is enough. It does not require the universe to be fully intelligible. It requires only that awareness continues to encounter what it cannot fully assimilate. Distance ensures that this encounter never ends. There will always be scales beyond comprehension, horizons beyond reach, times beyond synchronization. These features guarantee that consciousness remains oriented towards something larger than itself. They prevent collapse into solipsism. They ensure that awareness always faces outward, even if it cannot go far. In this sense, limitation deepens experience. It preserves mystery not as a temporary gap, but as a permanent dimension. Mystery becomes a stable feature of reality rather than a deficit to be eliminated. This stability allows humility to replace frustration. The mind stops demanding that the universe conform to its capacities. It recognizes that its capacities are one expression within a much larger structure. This recognition does not diminish selfhood. It contextualizes it. Context is what distance ultimately provides. By exceeding thought, the universe places consciousness in relation to something that cannot be contained. This relation is asymmetrical. The universe does not respond. It does not acknowledge awareness, yet awareness responds to it. Meaning arises from that response. It does not require reciprocity. It requires only exposure. To be aware in a universe too large for thought is to live with constant excess. There is always more than can be known, more than can be integrated, more than can be resolved. This excess is not an error. It is the environment of consciousness. The journey through scale does not end with understanding. It ends with perspective. Distance, once treated as a problem, becomes a teacher. It shows where cognition ends and where presence begins. It reveals that awareness is not diminished by its limits, but defined by them. The universe remains vast, unreachable in its totality, indifferent to comprehension, and within it, consciousness remains local, finite, reflective. The two coexist without resolution. There is no final synthesis that reconciles human thought with cosmic scale. The mismatch persists. That persistence is the point. To inhabit reality is not to master it, but to remain aware within it despite its excess. Distance mirrors this condition relentlessly. It reminds awareness of what it is not capable of, and in doing so, clarifies what it is. Consciousness does not dissolve into the universe, nor does it stand apart from it. It exists inside something fundamentally beyond awareness, and continues anyway. The universe does not need to be understood to be significant. Significance does not arise from total knowledge, but from the fact of being here, aware, within a reality that cannot be fully held. Distance ensures that this awareness never closes in on itself. It keeps thought open, unfinished, oriented towards something it cannot complete. The journey does not conclude. It settles, and in that settling, meaning does not resolve into an answer, but remains as a quiet recognition that to be conscious is to stand inside immensity, aware of one's limits, and still capable of reflection, even when the universe remains forever too large for thought.